Ourselves away from damp, drizzly Sydney, to forget the rain seeping through your shoes and the damp clinging to your trousers, and reimagine yourselves away from here, and it's 1837, and we're on the Persian steppe between Meshed and Herat, between northeast Iran and western Afghanistan. And it's a hot summer's night, and it's about 3 in the morning. And up the main military road to Meshed, coming up from the direction of Tehran, in the middle of the night, is a single horseman. And he's a young man, he's about 27. He's a young British intelligence officer called Henry Rawlinson. But as he comes into sight through the darkness, he is clearly exhausted. And you can see him nodding on his horse. And at some point that night, in the middle of the night, he falls asleep in the saddle. It's not clear how long he falls asleep for, but when he jerks awake, I don't know whether it's 10 minutes, half an hour, he hasn't fallen off the horse, but the horse has wandered off the road. And he's on his own, and he's in the middle of nowhere, and he has absolutely no idea where he is. Now, even at the best of times, the countryside between Meshed and Herat is not the kind of spot you want to get lost. Even today, it's opium smuggling territory, it's brigands, it's what we in Scotland call debatable land, between two rival principalities. And particularly at this moment, when there is a war about to break out. So Rawlinson is wandering around, trying to find his way back to the road, and he's very relieved when dawn begins to break, about 5:30 in the morning, over the Shah Jahan Mountains. And he works out from where the sun rises, where he is, and he begins to head back towards where he imagines the road will be. But as he's beginning to find his way back, he sees coming towards him the thing he least wants to see in the world. And what he sees, actually, I'm not going to tell you what he sees quite yet. What he sees alters the history of Central Asia and Afghanistan for the next 100 years, but I'm not going to tell you what it is just for a bit. It's a little bit of context. 1837, we are, whatever it is, 22 years after Waterloo. And Napoleon has been knocked out of the picture. He's in exile in St. Helena. And the French are back home out of the picture. And there are two big European powers competing to divide Asia between them. At this particular point in history, European armies have mastered the geometry and science of artillery, which means for this brief window, it's possible for European armies to cut their way through enormous Asian cavalry forces. And this is what the Russians have been doing, defeating the Persians and the Ottomans, and it's what the British are doing in India. But the British in India, important to remember, is not the British government doing this. It's something far more sinister. It is a public limited company. Think that nasty mining corporation in Avatar or something. The East India Company is a public limited company, founded in 1599, the year that Shakespeare writes Hamlet. And for 200 years, or 160 years, it goes about its work as trading companies do, bringing back silks and spices from the East and growing opium as one does, that kind of stuff. But then about 1760, it transforms itself into this aggressive imperial force. And in only 50 years, it conquers more of Asia than Napoleon conquered of Europe. It absorbs all of continental India as far as the Himalayas, either by alliances or by direct conquest. At the same time as that is happening in the south, the Russians are moving south at a rate of about 100 miles every decade. And any old buffer sitting in a gentleman's club in Pall Mall, or any Russian officer in a officer's mess in St. Petersburg, looking at a map, can see that these two powers are coming together. At some point, they're going to meet, probably in the space that we now call Afghanistan, in the Hindu Kush, if the trajectories of these two imperial armies continue. And what you get, particularly in London, is you get the 19th century equivalents of sort of Neil Ferguson or Daniel Pipes or one of these sort of neoconish writers producing toxic little documents saying, we've got to go and conquer more of the natives. We've got to take Afghanistan. And a guy called Colonel Richard de Lacy Evans produces a book which says, we need now to grab the high passes of Central Asia. We can sell our Manchester cottons, and moreover, we can fend off the tyranny of the Russian bear. And he posits this idea that a Russian force coming to Herat can march into British India in 3 weeks and inspire every court in Hindustan to rise up. We'll lose the jewel in the crown, all this stuff. But, he says, if we go into Afghanistan, we can control the routes from Samarkand to Delhi, from Iran to China. We will be the masters of Asia. So there's all this discussion going back. The trouble is that at this point, there are still thousands of miles separating the two empires. South of the Himalayas, you've got Ranjit Singh and all the Sikhs. Huge army, officered by crack ex-Napoleonic generals who've come over and paid handsomely by Ranjit Singh to run the Sikh Khalsa. North of the Himalayas, north of Afghanistan, you've got Bukhara, Khiva, Samarkand, Tashkent, all these fantastic names, these great emirates of Central Asia, the Stans as they are today. And those too are independent states which yet separate the Brits from the Russians. So it's all this polemic is quite pie in the sky, which is why what Rawlinson sees in this valley is important. Because what he sees is not opium smugglers or brigands or the Persian Qajar army heading off to attack Afghanistan or the Afghans coming to attack the Persians. What he sees, to his astonishment but also huge excitement, is a body of Russian Imperial Cossack cavalry in full uniform. Now, he doesn't know this, but they've only just got into their uniform because they've been traveling incognito from Tehran. And they have just changed into their uniform because they're pretty confident that in this wild stretch of desert, they're not going to run into anyone who's going to recognize them. They're just crossing into Afghanistan to begin their mission there. By pure chance, the fact that this guy happened to fall asleep means that a British intelligence officer sees this, and immediately he's riding back to Tehran. There are messages being sent by steamers from the Persian Gulf. 3 weeks later, Lord Palmerston gets a telegram in Downing Street, and the whole Victorian system cranks, all these cogs and levers of empire crank into war zone. And this is the war that the Hawks have been longing for. This is the news which will justify a foreign adventure. I mean, it's impossible to imagine today. Imagine that a group of ideologically driven hawks could manipulate a piece of intelligence, fiddle the books, and declare war on a country that has absolutely nothing to do with anything else. Here is the British ambassador in Tehran, John McNeill. This is what he writes to Palmerston. We should declare that he who is not with us is against us. We must secure Afghanistan. Then you get all this stuff. You know, all those sort of anxious New York Times editorials. What is the duty of an imperial conqueror? Are we there just to deprive our enemies of territory, or are we there actually to kind of whip all those women out of burqas and stuff them in miniskirts? And here's Sir Claude Wade, the British spy master, the M of his day, sitting in Ludhiana. There is nothing more to be dreaded or guarded against, I think, than the overweening confidence with which we are too often accustomed to regard the excellence of our own institutions, and the anxiety that we display to introduce them in new and untried soils. Such interference will always lead to acrimonious disputes, if not a violent reaction. So what he's saying is that we're not doing nation building. He's doing the Rumsfeld. He's saying we need to get in there and we need to deprive the Russian bear of this territory. And so 18 months later, a plan begins to be formed. This is Shah Shuja-ul-Mulk. This is the king of the title, Return of a King. This guy is the grandson of Ahmed Shah Durrani, who in the 1760s founds the first Afghan empire out of Kandahar. He, the granddad, conquers all of Afghanistan, eastern Persia, India as far as Delhi, Kashmir, all of modern Pakistan. But old Shah Shuja here is far more interested in writing poetry and tending his garden and having nice jewels and writing memoirs. He's a very good Persian poet. And so he loses his empire by the age of about 21. And for 30 years, he's been sitting in exile in Ludhiana. Granddad, incidentally, is a complete old horror. Ahmed Shah Durrani is the kind of RoboCop. If we had Avatar as the East India Company, Ahmed Shah Durrani's face is eaten up by what they call a gangrenous ulcer. I don't know whether it's a tumor or what it is, but his nose has disappeared, and the whole right-hand side of his face is sort of suppurating. And he covers it in silver, and he has a diamond nose in the middle of it. You wouldn't want to run into him in a dark night on Siebel Pier. Anyway, so Shah Shuja's been sitting in Ludhiana, where the spy master, Sir Claude Wade, has kept him away for a rainy day, and the rainy day has now come, in every sense. The idea is we'll take Shah Shuja out of retirement, and we'll put him back on the throne in Kabul. And this is the main Russian guy, Vitkovich, who's leading that cavalry force. Now, Vitkovich has gone off to see Dost Muhammad Khan, who is the ruler who threw out Shah Shuja and who's now ruling Afghanistan. A very strong ruler, using a lot of Islamic language as a form of legitimacy. He has declared a jihad against the Sikhs. So the first idea what the Brits have is that rather than invade directly using British Indian troops, what they'll do is they'll get Ranjit Singh, the ruler of the Punjab, to invade for them. And that he will put Shah Shuja back on the throne and get rid of his enemy, Dost Muhammad. Ranjit Singh, however, is far too clever to allow anything like this. And they send to negotiate this complete old buffer called Sir William Henry Macnaghten. And Macnaghten, who leads the negotiations, here's what his deputy is, a guy called Alexander Burnes. Burnes writes, "Poor Macnaghten should never have left the secretary's office. He is ignorant of men even to simplicity, and utterly incapable of forming and guiding administrative measures. The judicial line would probably have suited him best, and even then only in the Court of Appeal, judging only written evidence. The ideal man to lead an invasion of Afghanistan." So he goes off to negotiate with Ranjit Singh, and Ranjit Singh is meant to lead a Sikh expedition in British interests, but by the time Ranjit Singh's finished negotiating with Macnaghten, we end up with a British expedition in Sikh interests. And finally, Ranjit Singh actually closes the Punjab completely to the British army, so rather than going a 300-mile direct route from Ludhiana through the Punjab to Peshawar and into Afghanistan, the British end up taking a 1,500-mile detour through the hot deserts of Baluchistan, and various unmapped passes, and the whole thing is a complete disaster, even before they set off. It's clearly not going to be a winner, this one. Moreover, Alexander Burnes is in Kabul and says the whole war is completely unnecessary. He's talked to Dost Muhammad, and Dost Muhammad is very happy to have an alliance with the British and get rid of the Russians. And he writes this whole succession of earnest letters saying, "Stop this, this is ridiculous. We don't need to send a single soldier up here. Dost Muhammad is longing for an alliance. If we just do a bit of fancy diplomatic footwork with Ranjit Singh and get Peshawar back for the Afghans, Dost Muhammad will become our closest ally." But everyone ignores Burnes, because they all hate Burnes, because he's oversexed and too glamorous. And all the old buffers running the show in Calcutta think he's a jumped up, he's about 27. He's rather good looking. He has this fantastic, we're going back a bit here, but it's such a lovely story. So 1832, 5 years before all this happens, Burnes is sent off on a secret expedition to map the Indus. The British have realized that that their entire profit from India has come through sending steamships up the Ganges. And they realize if they can do the same with the Indus, they can sell Manchester cottons in Kabul, they can begin, importing all the lovely carpets from Bukhara and selling them more opium or whatever. But they need to get the Indus. But neither Ranjit Singh, who runs the top of the Indus, nor the Amirs of Sindh will let the British anywhere near the river because they know exactly what's going to happen. Then Burns comes up with this brilliant idea. He says, we know that Ranjit Singh loves horses. He's dotty about horses. And he's actually even fought a war with one of the little Punjab hill states in order to gain a stallion. So Burns has this idea that he'll get the King of England to present 4 Suffolk cart horses to Ranjit Singh. They're going to import what will be described as the biggest horses in the world, little elephants, for Ranjit Singh's stables. And then they add to this present an old carriage of the Lord Mayor of London that's sitting in some warehouse somewhere from about 100 years before. They regild it, pack it off to Karachi, and they ask Ranjit Singh's permission to send the presents up the river in order that they don't get damaged. Inside the Lord Mayor of London's carriage is a crack team of naval hydrographers, busy mapping the Indus, taking the flows and the sandbanks. And I've seen the report. It's at the National Archives in Delhi, and there's this sort of geeky report on hydraulics. But it's perfectly mapped by the time they get to Lahore. Anyway, so Burns has won his spurs doing this, and he has put to shame all the old spooks who are meant to be running the great game out of Ludhiana, particularly Sir Claude Wade. And Sir Claude Wade has suddenly found himself, that familiar figure we know very well in Washington and in London, I'm sure they don't exist in Canberra, the Afghan expert who's never been to Afghanistan. So anyway, Wade makes a point of ignoring Burns's advice, and this ludicrous expedition goes ahead as much through professional jealousy and interdepartmental politics as anything else. So, 18 months after the Russians are spotted entering Afghanistan, a huge East India Company army is assembled in Firozpur in the Punjab to invade Afghanistan. There are 14,000 East India Company sepoys, 6,000 irregulars, 21,000 troops in all, 38,000 Indian camp followers, and they march off to war on 30,000 camels. One brigadier needs 50 camels to carry his kit, while a general needs 260 for all his medals and uniforms. There are 300 camels that carry nothing but the regimental wine cellar, 30 camels carry nothing but cigars and cheroots.
Okay, that's the end of part 1.